The Codex of Power is a brand new system that's joining us in Diablo 4, essentially a recipe book or a collection book for all of the legendary aspects that you've unlocked either by progressing through the campaign or by finishing dungeons. During both beta weekends, we were able to see that there's 114 legendary aspects within the Codex of Power. And it's entirely possible that when the full game comes out, there could potentially be more, but these 114 were the ones that were visible to us in the beta weekends. Now, these basically break down into 15 common legendary aspects, which can be used by any one of the 5 classes, and then 20 per class, except for the rogue, which is the unlucky one with only 19 legendary aspects. Now, specifically today, we are going to be looking at the 20 for the sorcerer. Diving right in, we have aspect of biting cold. This says that whenever you freeze an enemy, there is a percentage chance that they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. Now, something that I've mentioned in each one of these videos that I've done, bear in mind that these legendary aspects, the ones that you get, that you store inside the Codex of Power, represent the lowest possible version of that aspect. You can get better versions of this on legendary gear, and this will be a big part of the min-maxing and improving your gear stage of the game, when you essentially have these base versions on your gear and then find a better one, then use the vendor to take that better one and replace the old one on your gear. So getting back to aspect of biting cold, basically here we have just a really awesome way of just double dipping into more CC and debuffs. If you are playing a mage, a sorcerer that uses, cold attacks, then a lot of those cold attacks essentially, freeze enemies eventually if you hit them enough with those. And this just means that those enemies will then have a chance of also becoming vulnerable. And vulnerable just means they take more damage overall. So this is phenomenal, and I think it's pretty good if you are going to be using a lot of frost-based attacks. You kind of have to use this one. Next up, we've got aspect of conflagration. Now this is while channeling incinerate, which is essentially like a flamethrower that you shoot out of a hand as a skill for the sorcerer. Your burning damage is increased by a percentage. Now, I was not that impressed by Incinerate in the betas. It's not necessarily my favorite skill of the sorcerer due to the fact that you have to essentially stand still and, shoot this flamethrower. But this certainly does, up the damage. 20% doesn't sound like a lot, but remember that's the base version, so this can go up quite a bit. So most likely you can turn this thing into a right old laser. So if you like Incinerate, then absolutely think about getting yourself some aspect of conflagration. After that, we're looking at aspect of control, and this says that you deal a percentage more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Again, if you are going to be playing a sorcerer that favors using frost-based attacks, ice-based attacks, then this is a phenomenal way for you to just dip into more damage. Generally speaking, when we're talking about the 3 different elements for the sorcerer, it's always thought of that fire is a lot of upfront damage. It's a lot of just raw power, and lightning can oftentimes be more focused on critting and crit damage, and then ice is more like the crowd control, essentially the one that allows you to control the battlefield more, but the payment for that is that you deal slightly less damage than the other 2 elements. This kind of neutralizes that and helps you to deal a little bit more damage and close that gap to the other elements a little more. Then we have aspect of efficiency, and this says that when you cast a basic skill, casting a basic skill reduces the mana cost of your next core skill by 10%. Again, this amount can of course go up. So generally speaking, when it comes to the primary resource of every class, whether you are playing a barbarian, a necromancer, or whatever, all of them have either mana or essence or something like that, basically fuel for the most powerful skills in the game. And generally how it works is that basic skills do not use that fuel, and they're a way for you to sort of fill up to fill up the tank. And then essentially your other skills, like for example core skills like chain lightning and fireball and stuff like that, essentially use this resource to deal damage. So this is just a way for you to, as you're doing this sort of cycle mechanic in any case, where you go basic core or basic core or whatever, it just means that you're benefiting from some mana efficiency there, and the more casts you can get out of one mana pool means the more damage you can deal. So not bad at all. Then we have aspect of piercing code, which says that ice shards pierce 3 times, dealing 25% less while a percentage less damage per subsequent enemy hit. So ice shards is, I think, I didn't experiment with this spell a lot, but it was kind of underwhelming, I would say, and that was due to the fact that it wasn't necessarily able to go through ads very quickly. Generally speaking, your basic skills are what you use for ad clear and weak enemies, and then you'll dump like core skills every once in a while on something that's a little bit tougher, or like an elite pack or something like that. This gives ice shards a little bit more functionality because it lets it pierce, meaning like it can actually do a lot more damage to groups of enemies, since it's a little bit more efficient that way. So if you are looking to use ice shards, this will probably be a good one to pick up. Aspect of singed extremities, I love that name. This says after immobilized wears off, enemies are slowed by 25% for 4 seconds. So immobilize is of course a CC, it's a crowd control mechanic, and this basically allows you to leverage the fact that if you are causing immobilize to a lot of enemies, then you're also able to slow them after they come out of that. Now that can be debilitating to a group of enemies that are essentially trying to charge you down, where you immobilize them, and as soon as they clear out of that, now they're basically right on top of you or quite close to you, and now they're also still slowed, and this gives you extra shots on them and everything like that. Now of course CC, I believe, is not as effective on boss or elite packs. I think there's some diminishing returns there compared to like normal mobs, but nonetheless being able to CC anything is fairly good, because any amount of time that you can keep enemies off of you and give yourself a free window to deal damage to them is of course a good thing. Then we have aspect of Splintering Energy. Now this says lightning spear has a percentage chance to spawn an additional lightning spear when you cast it. Basically how lightning spear works is you cast it and it sort of travels around the map, essentially passing through enemies and so I said map, but I meant like on your screen, right? Passing through enemies and dealing damage to them. It fires off 1 of these lightning spears, so this essentially has a chance of doubling up and having more of those out there. I wasn't blown away by the damage of lightning spear, but I'm sure there's ways in which you can stack this and have it deal more damage. And having 2 of them, there's only one thing that's better than one thing, and that's 2 things. So yeah, but I have to say that potentially, I mean, again, lightning spear on its own is not that flashy a skill. I wasn't, again, like I said, as impressed by that. So this might just be super underwhelming, because just like I said, now 2 of one thing is better. 2 of a medium thing, it's still medium, so it is what it is. Up next, we have aspect of static cling. Now, this is your cast of charge bolt have a percentage chance to be attracted to enemies and last 300% longer. Now how charge bolt works is essentially when you cast it, it fires out a bunch of these little, almost like, I mean, to me they look like lightning spiders, but you get what I'm saying. These little lightning that sort of like travel around. Now there's no way for you to really aim this skill, and you kind of like hope that either the enemy walks into one of these things by accident, or that you fill the area with so much of this shit that the enemy can't help but accidentally walk into it. This, however, basically makes the charge bolts potentially homing, which is a game changer. And then also the other thing, the fact that they last longer. So because they last 300% longer, like let's say for instance you walk into a room, there's a bunch of enemies around, you start casting charge bolt, now you're just gonna flood this area in front of you with these charge bolts, and because of this percentage chance, some of them are still gonna wander around like lost farts, but the other ones are actually gonna seek out enemies and deal damage to them. So I don't think this is going to be like game changing or anything like that, but it kind of sounds cool with the ability to just essentially flood the area with all of these charge bolts. And I think it's going to be really good at, ad clear. So at the very least, it might be worth looking into it for that. Next up is aspect of the bounding conduit. Well, this says that you gain a percentage movement speed for 3 seconds after teleporting. Teleport is the mobility skill for the sorcerer, like the leap is for the barbarian, and dash for the rogue. This is just going to augment your teleport, which is already a phenomenal mobility skill, to just give you some additional movement speed as soon as you come out of that teleport. And I think once we get to the stage where we are trying to make builds as efficient as possible and being able to cover large distances as fast as possible when you're doing dungeons, nightmare dungeons and whatever, then anything that you can do to squeeze a little bit of speed out of your character is going to be something that people are looking for. If you are running teleport in any case, like most people who are trying to do content fast is going to do, then this just seems like a really good partner aspect to teleport. Then we have aspect of the Unwavering, which says that taking direct damage has a percentage chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. Now your defensive skills can basically oftentimes mean the difference between you dying or being overwhelmed by enemies. If you look at something like, if you freeze everything around you and get away like that, or you have shield skills in the game, which are also defensive ones for the sorcerer. So this is if you are rolling those into your build. And because we played the betas and we played up to level 25 and we only had world tier 2, I don't think in many cases we were ever stressed to the point where content felt oppressingly difficult. But when we get to world tier 3 and world tier 4 and we start doing some of the more difficult content, we get to max level, we're doing nightmare dungeons, all of that, most likely thinking defensively is going to become a little bit more important. And in cases like that, giving yourself access to 2 defensive abilities if this procs, so you can essentially fire this off twice, is pretty good. Now this percentage is hella low. 5% is super low, but that depends on how high this can scale. If this can go all the way up to, let's say for argument's sake, I don't think it'll go that high, maybe it caps out at 30 or something, but let's say it caps out at 50. That's like a 1 in 2 chance that you get your skill back, which is really, really good, and probably means that this will then deserve a place in your build if we can get the percentage that high. Aspect of 3 curses is next, and this is that Meteor deals a percentage increased critical strike damage against healthy targets. Healthy targets being enemies that have 80% and more HP, so fresh enemies. This just means that your Meteor will now deal a percentage more increased critical strike damage. So when your Meteor criticals, it's going to deal more damage, and that could be pretty good. Again, I was far more impressed with Blizzard and its usability, but Meteor certainly will have a place as well. And again, a lot of things can change between where we were messing around at level 25 and going all the way up to 100. So this could be very good, but it remains to be seen. I still think the superior AoE will most likely be Blizzard, but yeah, we'll see what Meteor does for us. Then we have charged aspect. This is that collecting crackling energy increases your movement speed by a percentage for 4 seconds. Now crackling energy is a specific pickup that is unique to the sorcerer. Certain skills that the sorcerer uses or certain abilities that the sorcerer uses has a chance of spawning this crackling energy, and it's a separate bar on its own. You can pick up a certain percentage of these, and basically how crackling energy works is there's a couple of different aspects that can actually be loaded onto them, but this particular one now, crackling energy remains on your character, and as soon as enemies come within a certain distance of you, it will fire off and deal some damage to them, thereby consuming one of these crackling energy nodes. Now this means that as soon as you collect one, you're going to be moving faster. So if you are playing, mostly crackling energy comes from lightning based skills, so if you are playing lightning based build for the sorcerer, you're going to be creating a lot of these charge aspects. You're going to be creating a lot of these crackling energies, and then this will be a great way for you to also speed up your character movement through that. So pretty good. Again, I like the idea of giving us multiple different ways to increase the movement speed of our character. That's really going to help you speed run some of the later content. Then we have Elementalist aspect, which says that core or mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana gain the 20% increased critical strike chance. Of course, this percentage can go up. Now this means that your mana pool, you also, of course, within your skill tree, as well as on items, you have ways of increasing the size of your mana pool. You could end up with something like 150, 200, 250 mana. And this is that as long as you're above 100 mana, then you get this increased critical strike chance. That's pretty good. And I mean, this is a 20% increase. Imagine if this caps out at like a 40 or a 50%. That's really, really good chance for crit strikes. And if you're using specific skills that deal a lot of damage on crit, then this is really going to start pushing out some serious numbers. So if you are playing a build that stacks a lot of crit damage, this could be something that can definitely up your damage profile by quite a bit. Then we have Flamewalker's aspect, and this says coming in contact with your firewall grants you 15% movement speed for 4 seconds. So meaning like if you walk through your own firewall, Now generally firewall is like an area denial skill, so you know, if you're in a room and there's a door and enemies are flooding the area through that door, then you'll throw up a couple of firewalls in between you and that door, which means the enemies will be running towards you through your firewalls and obviously take damage. Now this is just going to mean that what you can do is you can augment the way in which you play it, and essentially maybe, you know, pop a firewall underneath you if you want to escape, if you want to run away faster, or again, in cases where you're trying to speedrun content, you can just always make sure that you are casting the firewall just in front of you and then moving through that, thereby benefiting from this movement speed, but of course also observing the enemies to make sure that you don't put yourself in, you know, too much danger. Cindery Aspect is next, and this actually works off of the lucky hit concept, which essentially means that every skill that you use in the game has a chance to perform a lucky hit. This lucky hit can often proc various effects, and in this particular case here, we'll see that if you score a lucky hit with whichever skill you're using, and here it specifies burning damage has up to a percentage chance to restore 10 mana. So this means that you would need to most likely use this with fire-based skills, so fire, you know, fireball, firebolt, you know, anything like that, meteor. And if you have one of those skills, pick the one that has the highest lucky hit chance of happening, and that's actually going to give you a cool way to essentially restore some of your mana, as long as you can get this percentage up a little bit, because 5% is kind of low. Then we have Prodigy's Aspect, which says using a cooldown restores 15 mana. Really cool as well. If you play a, mostly I would imagine that Sorcerer is going to probably revolve around using like Hydra, Blizzard, Frozen Orb, all of these kind of like skills that either, you know, let you deal damage while you focus on evading enemy, you know, contact, or that allow you to control the battlefield and essentially slow the fight down by disabling the enemies and debuffing them, like Blizzard and so on. So all of those are very mana hungry builds, some very mana hungry skills. And so anything that you can do for yourself to give you, you know, more of your mana back is going to be fantastic. And again, this number can scale up. So already 15 mana is not bad at all. But if this goes all the way up to like, I don't know, 30 or 40 or something like that, that's actually pretty damn sweet. Recharging Aspect is next, which says that each time Chain Lightning bounces off of you, you gain 4 mana. Now, Chain Lightning is one of the skills of the Sorcerer, which I really like. It makes leveling the Sorcerer feel super dynamic and fun and easy, because you just fire off these chain lightnings into groups of enemies while you're moving around. Everything, it deals a fair amount of damage. And of course, there's also ways for you to mod chain lightning that, for example, like chain lightning is very good against groups of enemies, but you can also, for instance, have its damage ramp up when the chain lightning repeats back on you. So in cases of where you are fighting, for example, a 1 target or 2 targets, and so now you're not benefiting so much of the AoE nature of chain lightning anymore, at least now you're ramping up the damage. This says that every time it bounces off you gain some mana, which means more mana equals more chain lightning. So it makes its own little engine. And again, if we can get this number up a little bit, this is actually pretty damn sweet, because chain lightning hits 5 times if I'm not mistaken. So if it's you and one other enemy, it'll be like cast, boom, 4 mana, boom, 4 mana, boom. So you're getting like 8 mana back in this particular example. Again, if the number goes up, it's more. So every 3 casts basically, I would say, pays for another chain lightning. So that's actually pretty damn dope. Then Snow God's Aspect is next, which says while within your own blizzard, you take 10% less damage. Now, kind of like the same way that I spoke about using Firewall, and you know, it's an area denial, you know, spell ability. The same thing is true for Blizzard. Generally speaking, we use Blizzard to essentially lock down enemies as they're moving towards us, because it'll slow them and eventually freeze them. It'll give us time to put Hydras around them or shoot frozen orbs through them or whatever. But this means that when you actually dump your Blizzard on top of you, which oftentimes happens if you just get overwhelmed by a shitload of enemies, it's a very cool way for you to essentially give yourself a little bit of breathing room. It's just to dump like 2 blizzards on top of yourself. Enemies that come within melee range are immediately frozen, well, slowed and then frozen. And this is just going to give you some, you know, flat damage reduction as well, because this just says 10% less damage. So it's not, it doesn't focus on physical, it doesn't focus on elemental, it's just 10% less damage. Of course, this number can go up, so that's also pretty good. Then we have Snow Veiled Aspect, which says casting Ice Armor, which is one of your defensive skills as a sorcerer, makes you unstoppable for 2 seconds. Now, there's going to be PvE and PvP in the game. It's possible that in PvE we are going to sometimes fight some enemies which can be maybe irritating from a CC perspective. Maybe they freeze you, maybe they stun you or something like that, and you're going to need ways that you can break that. Now, Unstoppable is the mechanic in the game that essentially allows you to break CC. And anything that you can do to give yourself unstoppable is going to give you a way to essentially escape from being CC'd. Now, why this is super important is that I believe that in PvP, unless you're dealing in situations where something is just flat out one-shotting you, or 4 enemies like dumpster you or something like that, if you are, one-on-one against another enemy, I believe it's whichever class has the better ability to CC the other class and give themselves, windows for, dealing damage to the enemy is going to be the victorious one. So on the other side of that argument, you also then need to build your class in such a way that if you're going to be PvPing a lot, that you have ways of getting out of being CC'd, and this right here is exactly that. Then we have Storm Swell aspect, and this says that you deal a percentage increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Now, almost all of the defensive skills of the sorcerer basically give you this barrier effect. There's also some aspects which just flat out give you a defensive barrier when you fight like, a pack of elites or something like that, like aspect of the protector. And so this is just going to help you deal more damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Now, this would have certainly been just flat out better if you just dealt more damage while you had a barrier on you. So you are only going to be able to benefit from this increased damage to enemies that are vulnerable. But again, as we've already seen with some of these aspects, there are ways for you to augment your skills, even just in picking certain skills that essentially with the upgrades to them allow the enemies to become vulnerable when you hit them with that skill. So that in combination with this means that you get a nice big damage buff. If you've got your barrier on and they are vulnerable, you're just going to take them down even faster. And that's all 20 of the legendary aspects for the sorcerer in the Codex of Power. Holy shit, we made it through all 20. Same thing that I did with the previous videos on this. By the way, this is the last one in the series. I've already done the other 4 classes as well as all of the common ones, so go ahead and check out the channel if you want to see those ones if you aren't planning on playing sorcerer. But same thing that I did in those videos. I'm gonna pick the 3 ones which I sort of like the most out of the 20 that we just discussed here now. Not because I think they, you're super sick or they're going to be broken as hell or something like that at full launch, but rather because they look interesting to me and I can already think of ways of wanting to include them in some of my builds. Now, these are of course in no particular order, but aspect of the biting cold is in number 1, which says that whenever you freeze an enemy, there's a chance that they'll also become vulnerable. I tend to run Blizzard in almost every single build that I've done for the sorcerer so far, and this is just a phenomenal way of just increasing the damage, the follow-up damage to those enemies by also making them vulnerable. So that's good shit. In combination to that, and the second one then is aspect of control, which says that you deal a percentage more damage to enemies that are immobilized, stunned, or frozen. So again, double dipping, triple dipping even on the damage here, and just allowing us to, once we start freezing enemies, just really wreck them with damage. And then in the third one, we have aspect of the bounding conduit, which gives us a nice movement speed increase as soon as we finish teleporting. Teleport is on a super low cooldown by default, which you can drop even more, which makes the sorcerer extremely mobile and the ability to zip around the battlefield, and giving yourself even more movement speed as you come out of that teleport is also pretty damn sweet, and I think it's really going to make the sorcerer zoom around the battlefield. And one last thing I want to say about the sorcerer and the aspects is, out of all 5 classes, I found the sorcerer's 20 Codex of Power aspects to be the most underwhelming. I don't know if it's because I just at this point in time, are focused more on what I can do with the barbarian and what I can do with the rogue, and the options for the barbarian and rogue are certainly a lot more spicy. But yeah, I just didn't think they were like really strong candidates in the Codex of Power for the sorcerer, which is a little bit of a letdown. Hopefully the uniques for the sorcerer, as well as some of the ones which aren't in the Codex of Power, are actually pretty damn good, but we'll have to see. One more thing before I let you go, I'm currently running a giveaway event. I'm giving away 3 copies of the Diablo 4 base edition on the platform of your choice. If that sounds like something you'd like to win, check out the description of this video. There is a link to another video that explains exactly what you need to do to enter this event. And on the 1st of June, live during a stream, I will be drawing the 3 winners, and hopefully you can be one of those winners. But hopefully you also have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.